Good morning, everyone. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I just want to let you all know that this workshop is a repeat of the workshop that I did live this summer. And I did recognize some familiar faces. So if you took the Managing Change Through Adaptive Leadership workshop this summer, you've already done this. I actually have revamped this workshop. I had to shorten it up a bit for the shorter time frame that we have, but otherwise it's going to be the same as the material that we covered over the summer. If you want to have a review of what we did over the summer, great, that's no problem at all. But I just wanted to let you know that this is going to be very familiar because it's the same training that we did this past summer. Okay, so first, I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Teresa Floyd. I'm an associate professor of management in the College of Business here at UM. I'm married with one kiddo. My husband and I just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. And Natalie, our daughter, is, oh shoot, I should have changed that. She's now 15 years old and a sophomore at Hellgate High School. And I spent 14 years in retail merchandising before I decided to go back to school so I could be a college professor. All right, so here's what we hope to get done today. We want to talk about the difference between technical and adaptive challenges or problems. We want to be able to explain why adaptive to challenges require kind of different skills in order to address them. We want to talk about and learn to apply the adaptive leadership process. And the shorthand for that is observe, interpret, and intervene. We're going to learn about the value of a stance of inquiry. And we will learn about acting politically to expand our informal authority and find allies and build coalitions. And then we're going to apply these tactics that we're learning to a current challenge that you're facing in your own work. So my main goal here is to provide you with some truly practical tools that you can apply to your jobs right away. I hope that the tools that you walk away with today are immediately useful to you. All right. So let's briefly talk about adaptive leadership. Oftentimes when organizations want to implement change, they encounter some resistance from their employees. And I'm sure that if I asked for a show of hands in the room, many of you as leaders and managers in your organizations have encountered change resistance, right? And so I'll put it up to the room and ask you, okay, so why do people resist change? Feel free to put it in the chat or say it out loud. What have you encountered? Why is it that people resist change? All right, they think they are right. Change is the unknown. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown. Lack of time to learn the new way. Fear, perceive that it's going to lead to more work. Makes them feel uncomfortable, discomforts, change burnout. We're all feeling a little overwhelmed, right? We're living in a perpetual state of change right now. Excellent. Some people just are a little closed-minded to the idea of change. Oh, the cake of custom. B-Rad, it took me a second to understand that, but I love it. Nice metaphor. The cake of custom tastes good. What they're used to is much more comfortable, and it tastes good. Excellent. All right, so I feel like you guys have hit at the main point that I'm trying to get to, which is, oops, let me back up. I went too far. the idea that people don't necessarily resist change, but they resist loss, right? And those of you that said fear of the unknown, just like discomfort, etc., I think all of those are getting at this idea that people are afraid that change is going to result in them losing something that's important to them. It could be losing that familiar feeling that I know what my job is, I know what to do, I feel confident, that I can do it every day. It could be they fear losing a certain level of status that they've achieved in their current job, right? Because, oh, I'm known as the person who knows how to do this process. People come to me for help. That gives me a certain level of, like feeling like I'm contributing something, and now you're going to take that away from me. So the idea is that people really, when you talk about change resistance, it's not the change itself, it's the loss that they fear will come along with the change. So adaptive leadership, I'm going to move this over a bit. There we go. Adaptive leadership is the practice of, number one, getting people on board, right? Mobilizing people to tackle tough challenges so that they can help to enact the change, right? And the idea is that this mobilization of folks is about building capacity in the organization so that the organization can thrive. Also recognizing that the traditions and the status quo has valuable, essential parts to it, right? And so change is not intended to throw everything out. It's building upon the essential aspects of the organization. So builds upon the past. And then being okay with the idea that adopting new practices is going to take some experimentation. We're going to try some things, they're not going to succeed, and then we'll try other things. And, it's going to be a bit of an iterative process. This is not something that we can do once and have it settled. All right, so the idea that often comes when we decide that we need to make some changes is that the system in our organization is broken, right? It's not achieving what it's supposed to do. And because of that, we need to change it because our system is broken. And what I want to challenge you with is that idea. Right now, your system is perfectly aligned to achieve the results it currently gets. So not only is it chugging along and doing what it was, set up for and built over time for to do, but many of your employees like it the way that it is. And that kind of gets at what B-Rad was saying when he said that the cake that we're all used to tastes good. And that's where those feelings of loss are generated from, is that many people like the current system and think it's working just fine. So you want to use this concept of adaptive leadership to not only get people's buy-in, mobilize people to get on board, but sustain them through the risk, that risk of loss that comes with it. So as a leader, you have to acknowledge and understand the losses that you're asking some of your employees to accept and empathize about that. And then at the same time, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so they say. Only change what you really have to change. All right, so now we're going to dive in and start talking about technical versus adaptive challenges. So technical challenges are the ones that are probably easier to fix, right? So they're easy to identify. You could say, you know, our current system is no longer doing what we need to do for our clients, for our stakeholders, you know, customers, whatever. So relatively easy to identify and relatively cut and dry. You know, if the, you know, the current IT system that you have isn't working, well, you know what changes need to happen so that it does what you need it to do, right? You know what it is that needs to be changed. You can call on an authority or an expert to fix it for you, right? You can find an IT person who can redesign your system or make patches in your system to make it do what you need it to do. Most technical challenges require relatively small changes in just a few places. Most people are receptive to this change because it's easy to identify how they can benefit from the problem being fixed, right? And the fixes are quick and easy. Adaptive challenges, on the other hand, are easy to deny or ignore, right? And they require changes in not just our systems or even our processes, but they require changes in our values, in our beliefs, and the roles that we play at work. That's where the loss comes from. We can't call somebody in to solve it for us. As much as, you know, companies call in consulting organizations to try to help them achieve changes in the culture, ultimately, that consulting organization can only provide guidance. What happens is that the entire organization or department or team has to solve it together, because only the people in the organization know how things need to be changed in order for it to work better, right? It requires change in a lot of different places. Adaptive challenges are the kinds of challenges that you can't just do a little spot fix here and there. And because of the fact that they're easy to deny, you have to change values, beliefs, and roles. It requires change all over the place. There's a lot more resistance to adaptive challenges. And then the last point about adaptive challenges is that you're gonna have to invest a decent amount of time, and you're gonna have to do some experimentation. You're going to have to try and fail, maybe several times with several different opportunities or several different possibilities before you find the right thing. So I should say before we go on, if you have questions as I'm going along, please feel free to jump in, either enter the question in the chat or just jump in and say, hey, Teresa, I have a question here. I can't really see anybody's raised hands. So if you're raising a hand in Zoom, I can't really see it. So I'll encourage you to use the chat room, because either Emily or Amy will let me know of your question, or feel free to jump in as I'm talking and just ask your question.
We're looking for raised hands as well, so don't worry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Emily. That's terrific. All right, so let's dive into adaptive challenges a little bit more. And we're going to talk about, remember how I said that the whole idea of adaptive leadership is to preserve what is essential. And so that is the middle part of this slide. What do we need to continue doing? And it could be that, you know, many of the processes that you already have in place are satisfying certain needs. And so those are the things that you need to continue doing. But you also need to figure out not just what new stuff, what new things do we need to start to build, but you need to figure out, what are we doing now that we need to stop doing? What processes are just like relics of the way that we used to do things, and they're really not serving us anymore. All right, so let's talk about some of the differences between technical and adaptive change. When we talk about actually trying to address these challenges, right? So first, the leadership provides direction about addressing the challenge that they're facing in the organization. And for technical challenges, that direction is relatively simple. All you have to do is say, here is the problem, and here is our proposed solution. And then you have to win people over to the proposed solution, right? And I think that that approach is the type of approach that most of us feel most comfortable with as leaders, right? We, probably got to be leaders because we're good problem solvers. And so we think that defining the problem and then providing the solution as quickly as possible is the best way to approach it. And that's fine for simpler technical challenges. But for adaptive challenges, you have to point out the challenge that you're facing as an organization, department, or team. But then you have to, rather than say, okay, and here's my proposed solution, you have to say, okay, and here's the questions I have for all of you. Because that is the only way that you're going to start to get buy-in from the rest of your team about how to address the challenge. The challenge is too complex to be solved by a simple solution or by an outside expert. You all need to solve it together. And so you need to get buy-in from the get-go. And so starting to ask the right questions of your team members might be things like, okay, so here's the challenge that I'm identifying. What are the things about our current process that make it not work for you? Or what are the ways that we are not satisfying the needs of our clients or stakeholders, right? So these are the types of questions that you might consider asking as you're identifying the challenge, right? As leaders, we often try to protect our employees. It's an important part of what we do, but for technical and adaptive challenges, what we are able to protect them from is different. In a technical change, we can likely protect them from most external threats, right? So we're implementing a small change in our IT system, and we'll protect our employees from the threats of that by, doing a really good rollout and providing good training, et cetera, right? When we're talking about an adaptive change, it's more important for employees to be aware of the potential issues, right? So the challenge itself is presenting threats to the team or the organization. And as you work together to try to address the challenge, that is going to expose everyone to threats as well. So it's more letting employees know about the threats that might exist without making them panic, right? Like, clearly show that you're going to support everyone through the process, but let them know that you're aware and make them aware so that they can, begin to protect themselves as well. All right. And then finally, as we're addressing this challenge and we're implementing the change, I think that most leaders attempt to implement some kind of order or keep some kind of order through the process, right? And so oftentimes that means that as far as orientation goes, like, how people are getting used to adapting to the change. For technical changes, we mostly just keep people in their current roles because we're changing relatively small issues, right? But for an adaptive challenge, you really have to be okay with everyone's roles kind of getting a little disoriented. And don't rush to reestablish or redefine the roles that people are going to play, right? Be okay with, you know, certain people's job duties changing or certain people's role in your process changing, and wait to figure out exactly how that change is going to play out. Conflict is a huge thing. And most of us, when we think of conflict management, we think about restoring order and equanimity and keeping everybody happy as much as possible. That's fine for technical changes, but for adaptive change, you have to learn to think of conflict as something that is going to expose potential problems or expose new opportunities that you would miss out on if you didn't allow conflict to emerge. And so there's this idea of trying to maintain a certain level of functional conflict where discourse and disagreement, as long as they're done professionally, are the types of things that are going to help us do a better job as we go through this change. And then finally, the whole idea of adaptive change is that your norms and status quo and the things that the company and all the folks in the organization are familiar and comfortable with are going to need to be challenged and likely changed. And so you have to either yourself challenge norms or be okay with norms being challenged by the people on your team, because they might challenge some of the norms that you as a leader hold dear. So what we're really talking about when we talk about adaptive change is that we have to help our people be okay with being a little uncomfortable. So don't rush to make them comfortable and happy again, but help them through the discomfort. All right, so we're going to go through the steps of adaptive leadership. And then as soon as we get through this kind of intro section, you're going to actually get some practice at this. So adaptive leadership is relatively simple to remember: observing, interpreting, and intervening. And so for observing, what we're asking ourselves to do is try to get rid of our preconceived ideas and just observe what is actually happening. I use this metaphor of getting on the balcony. So the idea is when you're on the balcony, you can see the whole dance floor and you can kind of get a sense for the patterns and the different kind of things that are happening. When you're on the dance floor, you can only see what's immediately around you. And oftentimes we spend a lot of time on the dance floor, right? In our day-to-day jobs, we're looking at what's immediately around us. We're addressing issues as they come up, etc. And so what observing is about is trying to step outside of our day-to-day and look at what's going on all around us, not just in our own organization, but also in our sector. So what's going on in healthcare right now? Like, I know you all know exactly what's going on right now. You're going through a really challenging time and it feels like it's been going on forever. So you know what the challenges are that are coming from the health, just like the healthcare sector. The structural implications of your organization, right? So not just the day-to-day operations of how the organization gets things done, but the way that the organization is structured and what that leads to. like how that structure influences the work. And then cultural forces, that could be cultural forces inside the organization, which is like the cake that B-Rad mentioned, or it could be cultural forces outside the organization as well, which I know that many of you in public health are dealing with on a regular basis. So interpreting is where you try to figure out, okay, so based on what I'm observing, what is explaining what's happening? And what maybe could we consider doing in order to better address what is happening? And so you're not trying to put together the best argument to get everybody to agree with you about what is causing what you're seeing. Instead, you want to seek input from everyone in your team, in your department or your organization. Okay, here's what I'm observing. And this is part of raising those good questions, framing the good questions. What do you think is causing this challenge that I'm observing? And then by testing the alternative explanations, by that I mean, you might have a lot of different explanations for what might be happening. And then you have to put them all through a litmus test and say, okay, so if this is what's causing what's happening, then maybe the best thing to do would be to do this. And that's where you get into the next step, which is where you start intervening and trying different experiments. You have to be okay with getting it wrong up here, because this is where you figure out, okay, that idea was wrong, but this idea seems to be working, right? And so experimenting to determine what might work. Stay open to the possibility that your experiments might fail, and be okay with going back and trying something different, right? So it'll be an iterative process. You're not going to have a silver bullet that's going to solve everything. As you're experimenting, you also have to obviously think about, okay, where am I? What's my role? You know, what kind of, do I have the bandwidth and the authority to, you know, lead? And then what resources are available, which, you know, obviously both of those things make it really hard, but there's something that we all can do no matter where we are in the organization, no matter how limited resources are, there's something that we all can do, right? And I'm with you, man. Like I'm sure that you've all heard about the budget issues at the University of Montana and how our declining enrollment until very recently, thankfully our enrollment looks like it's heading in a better direction now, but until recently declining enrollments meant that resources were incredibly tight. But even in my role as just an associate professor, right? Like I'm not the chair of my department. I'm not an associate dean. I'm not a dean. I looked around and said, I think that there are things that we could do to make our undergraduate management program better for our students. And then what I considered where I was sitting in the organization, and I considered the incredibly limited resources that we had available. And I made some changes to help our students understand what they could do with our management degree. So I didn't add a bunch of new courses that we couldn't fund. I didn't add, you know, like a bunch of new resources. All I did was kind of organize the major into these little career tracks. So our management students could say, oh, okay, so with this management major, I could do this or this or this. It gave them a little bit of organization so that they knew where they could go with it. And, you know, that was something that we could do with the resources that we had available at the time. I'm hoping that we'll start to see some improvement in our enrollments in the management program because of that. So I'll keep you posted, I guess. All right. And then as you're trying these experiments, you want the folks that are with you to buy into the goal for the intervention, right? Like, so what is our shared purpose? And, you know, we still have a relatively small management faculty. And, but the folks in the management faculty all agreed in the main purpose, which was, yeah, we need our students to understand what they can do with this program so that we can help give them more guidance as they move into their careers. And so that shared purpose is really important. Okay, we finished up just a few minutes early, so that's terrific. So this is where you are going to take a little time to do the first adaptive challenge exercise. And so in your participant packet, and Emily, if you can just put that link in the chat, just in case somebody doesn't have it in front of them. In your participant packet, you're going to find a section that says adaptive challenge exercise 1. And so you're going to practice going through an on the balcony exercise to observe the factors that are contributing to the dilemma that you have. And so when you're thinking about your dilemma, you're going to think, okay, number one, this is something that I'm facing and my organization is currently facing because I want it to be useful for you to be able to go back and try to implement some change in your organization. It has to be something that you're okay with describing and telling a group of peers about it, because we're going to do some peer consulting. When you're doing your peer consulting, anonymity is absolutely necessary, right? So you're going to need to be able to explain enough about the situation that your peers can understand it and perhaps help you and give you suggestions while keeping people's names and identities, private, right? Think about a challenge that matters, right? It's gonna impact your own performance and the performance of your organization. You think it's gonna make a big difference for your stakeholders, whoever those are, patients, clients, etc. It's gonna make a big difference for your stakeholders. And something that you really want to explore alternative suggestions and opportunities about, right? And so that's what you're going to do. And then you're going to do the on the balcony exercise, which you'll see on the following pages, where I ask several questions about how to think about how your sector, the structure of your organization, and cultural forces within the organization are affecting your challenge. And there's space for you to, kind of take notes if you have this, if you've printed it out in paper form. If not, you can just like jot down notes in a document, right? And then you're actually going to write up a description of your case dilemma that you can explain relatively quickly, right? It can be a Word document where you have a bunch of bullet points, just like notes in front of you, so you can tell the people in your peer consulting group about your dilemma. And these are the things that you want to describe to them. And so I'll pull this over. You guys, I hope are all looking at your participant packet, but these are the things that you want to include in your case. Tell us about the issue. What are the technical and adaptive aspects of it? Talk about the factors that are contributing to the dilemma using that on the balcony exercise. Maybe describe what you've already done and where you are right now. And then think about a question that you want your peers to help you with. So I'm going to give everyone about, let me double check my agenda, about 30 minutes. So I will be here. If you have questions as you're working on it, please go ahead and put those questions in the chat. but I will, and I will actually keep this up so that you can look at it as you're working on it. I'll keep, in case anyone wants to look at this, but you know, as you're working on your case preparation, just jot down your notes for yourself and yeah, you know, send me a message in the chat if you have any questions at all. I'm sure that you've all been industriously working on getting your cases together. Did anybody have any trouble thinking of a case? I have a feeling that's probably not a problem, but we all have so many things that we deal with at work on a regular basis. All right, excellent. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to split you into groups of, with Emily's help, into groups of 2 or 3, no more than 3, and definitely at least 2. And I think that, you know, we'll have mostly groups of 3. And what you're going to do is you're going to engage in some peer consulting now. So this peer consulting, I think, is the best part of this course, because you get to explain to your peers some of the issues that you're facing with this dilemma that you've described, and they are going to, oh, great, thank you, Alicia. I hope that you're able to get back on. Anyway, they are going to help you kind of brainstorm some potential experiments or ways to address the issue. So let me share my screen again so I can walk you through the instructions. So for our first breakout session, this is in your participants packet on page 8. You're going to engage in some peer consulting. So peer consultants, what I want you to do is listen carefully to each presenter and really try to understand their stakes in the dilemma that they're describing and what their interests are. What would it look like for the presenter if they could achieve some success or some progress towards success? And then for this session, you're really gathering information, because in the second breakout session, we're going to do some brainstorming. So you're going to take turns, and this session is going to last until we break for lunch at noon. And so for the first presenter, for each presenter, you'll have 7 minutes to present your case. And you want to explain that leadership challenge that you're facing. And then the peers are going to spend 8 minutes asking questions to understand better. It's really, really tempting and really, really easy to start brainstorming here. I want you to try to avoid brainstorming and really ask questions to understand better what's going on. So make sure that you know who the major players are. What are their formal relationships? Any informal alliances that the presenter mentioned? Or if they didn't mention, maybe this is something that you ask about so you understand better. Who's the senior authority? Make sure you understand what the presenter has done so far. Maybe find out what the presenter has decided not to do, and make sure that you understand what success would look like. So I'm just going to leave, well, actually can't leave this up on the screen because you're going to go into breakout rooms. So take a screenshot right now, if you like, before you go into the breakout rooms. And before I have Emily send you the invites, does anybody have any questions about how to do this session? Oh, one thing I should say, so most of the breakouts are going to have 3 participants. So you'll have 3 case presentations, right? Some of you, there'll only be 2. And so you can spend a little extra time on each case presentation. So you can spend like 20 minutes or so on each person instead of the 15. And you might appreciate that. I find that 15 minutes feels awfully short sometimes, but if you stay focused, you should be good. I see a lot of chats, so let me just make sure.
So how long do you want these breakout rooms open total?
They're going to stay open until noon, and then we're going to break for lunch.
Awesome.
Cool. And what else do we want to say?
If you do need help, you're able to holler at one of us and we can come to your room.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
similarly, and you can also return to the main room at any point if that's not working for some reason or you need help, and then we can assist.
Yeah. And then we can send you back in the breakout room. So at noon, we'll break for a half an hour for a quick lunch, and then we'll come back at 12:30. And then somebody said, can we share our screens during the breakout session? And yes, you can. All right, any other questions before Emily sends you the invites? All right, let's go ahead and get started. And if anybody comes back a little late, hopefully they won't miss too much. I'm going to share my screen so we can start in on our next topic. All right. So we are going to dive into talking about the concept of appreciative inquiry. And there's a related concept called a stance of inquiry. So I'm going to talk about both because I think that they go together nicely, and I really do like them both. And I think that they are both quite helpful when we're trying to address these adaptive challenges. So first, let's talk about the stance of inquiry. Oftentimes, we are better served by acknowledging the possibility that we are not the necessarily the expert, or we don't have the absolute right solution to any issue that we're facing, right? And this kind of leads into the idea of seeking that input from other folks that you're working with, so that you can come up with a solution not only that they can buy into, but also that potentially will be a better solution. And so a stance of inquiry rather than certainty, and the humility to believe that we have more to learn than we do to teach, even as leaders in our organizations, even with our years, possibly decades of experience. There's still things that all of us could learn, and the collective mind of the folks that we work with is a great place to get that learning. So 2 things that you can do to kind of embrace this idea is, number 1, make your own thinking visible. So don't be afraid to explain where your ideas are coming from. Not to convince other people to believe them, but just so that people can understand what your reasoning was, how you got where you are, and acknowledge that there are assumptions in that logic train that you just used, right? Try to identify, but then definitely share those assumptions. And acknowledge trade-offs. This kind of goes back to kind of being empathetic to the employees that may suffer loss because of this adaptive change that you're trying to implement. Acknowledge that there are things that you had to trade off in your coming to the conclusions that you came to. And then make other people's thinking visible as well. And by that, I mean, you're openly asking other people for their insights, making it public that you're asking for that insight, listening carefully, and then testing your understanding of what they're saying, and then summarizing what they've said for clarity, right? And so by testing your understanding, I mean, you say something like, so I'm hearing that you are feeling blah, blah, blah. Is that correct? That's how you test your understanding. And then hopefully they say, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Then at the end of the conversation, you say, okay, so here's where we are right now, and summarize what you have just discussed. And this can be done in the middle of a meeting where you're seeking insights and suggestions from a bunch of folks. This can be done in a brainstorming session. Allow the brainstorming to happen without interruptions, but then at the end, make sure that you understand the ideas that people have come up with during the brainstorming, using this making others thinking visible kind of these steps. All right, and so a big part of active listening is really this idea of using powerful questions. So when you're listening to somebody else, don't be thinking of your next response. That's something that I think we all do, right? When we're listening, even when we're trying to actively listen, our brains are automatically generating a response. So really try not to think of your response. Try to think more of, okay, what is it that they're trying to tell me? Try to be aware of, and if possible, get out of your own frame of reference. The reason why you're asking other people for their insight is because they have different points of view and different frames of reference that can be valuable. So try to get out of your own frame of reference and then use questions to better understand the other person's perspective. Besides modeling the inquiry approach, how do we help others engage in inquiry-based communication? That's an excellent question, Logan. So I think that the best way to do that is, to the extent that you feel comfortable, share the things that you've learned in this workshop with the people that you work with, right? The notes that you've taken, start talking about this idea of the stance of inquiry. And I've provided some additional materials at the end of your participants packet, but good time to raise something else that I wanted to share. If you are interested in learning more about this idea of adaptive leadership, this is the book that a lot of this is coming from, and I'm scratching the surface of what this book covers. So if you think this idea would be something that would be useful for your department or your organization, I recommend taking a look at this book. You can see it's not expensive. It's on Amazon for only 23 bucks. This is written by several folks at the Harvard Business School. So it's good quality stuff, and it's really practical and really provides a lot of tools that you can use. Okay. Let's see here, there we go. All right, so back to our slide deck. Now we're gonna dive into this idea of appreciative inquiry. And so what we're trying to do here is change the way that we normally approach change. Normally when we approach change, we focus on something that's not working and try to decide how to fix it so it'll work better. An appreciative inquiry is to focus on what is working and co-design what you want the future to look like. It sounds like mumbo jumbo, but it is practical, and let me show you how. So normally what we do is we say, okay, we've identified this problem, and we're gonna try to figure out the source of the problem, and then we're gonna find a remedy to address that source of the problem, and then we're gonna implement the remedy, right? And totally logical, totally reasonable. Instead, appreciative inquiry, in part, it's reframing the way you think about problem solving. So in part, instead of saying, okay, we've got a problem here, this is not working properly, instead, you define an outcome that you'd like to see. Oftentimes that outcome is based upon the problem that you've identified. That's totally fine. You're just rewording the way that you're talking about it. However, the next thing that happens, instead of doing analysis to try to identify the source of the problem. Instead, you're saying, what strengths does our organization have that could help us get to this desired outcome that we have? So what strengths do we already exhibit that could help us get there? And then when you're blue skying and thinking, oh, what could we do? You're really kind of building upon your strengths that already exist because you've focused your mind in that direction, right? So you're building on what already exists to identify what else you could do, and then figure out how to get to your desired outcome. So it sounds a little squishy, but it is like actually possible. And a lot of it has to do with just like the way that you're framing what you're going after. It's kind of like athletes who visualize their own success before they go out and do their athletic event. You're visualizing the success that you want, and then thinking about how the strengths that already exist are going to help contribute, and then thinking about how you can build upon what you already have. And so here's a picture of the appreciative inquiry process. It's also in your participants packet, because I'm going to ask you to use this process in just a few minutes to go back to that challenge that you've identified. So what is the desired outcome? You define it. Discovery is about identifying what our strengths are. Dreaming is about, okay, so how could we get to that outcome? What could we do to achieve what we're hoping for in the future? And then you're actually doing the design part, which is coming up with the experiment or the action that you're going to take to achieve that dream. So like I said, starting out with the outcome that you want and the strengths that you already have will hopefully reframe the way that you approach getting where you want to go. And then deployment is when you actually give it a try, right? And remembering that experimentation is still part of the game. You might deploy an action or an intervention that doesn't work, and that's okay. Then you go back to the drawing board and think of a new action that might help you reach that dream. All right, next, we're going to talk about acting politically and experimentation. And so this is another step in the process. The reality is that we all at work are operating within a somewhat political environment. And that doesn't mean, I don't mean politics as in like backstabbing and bad stuff, right? I mean that the reality is when people get together and they try to achieve something together, the inevitable kind of interaction of all these competing goals and objectives is going to create kind of a political environment, which means that you need to be aware of where the formal and informal authority resides, who allies and adversaries might be, and who might not necessarily agree with what you're thinking. And so no matter where you are in the organization, there are ways that you can expand your own informal authority. And the secret is informal authority is often better at getting things done than leaning on a title, right? Or saying, you know, you just have to do this because you report to me, right? And so some ways that you can expand your informal authority is think about how to strengthen your relationships. Oftentimes that means doing some real good active listening, right? To build those relationships with others. When you're attempting to address a challenge, score some early wins and then make sure people are aware of the things that they've achieved together. Support the interests of others. Find out what other people care about and make sure that if you can, you're incorporating those interests into your idea or your intervention. And then sell your idea small pieces at a time. Finding allies, people that are likely to support you, or maybe just people who you see as being a positive influence in the organization, and identifying folks that have a stake in your success. These might be folks that are champions of your, mentors of you, or champions of you. And don't forget the folks that you can win over that wouldn't necessarily be assumed to be your allies in this idea. So whatever it is, if it's somebody that is typically a naysayer, or if it's somebody that others might expect to disagree, they can be, those unlikely allies can be the ones that help you win other people over. Pay attention to your adversaries, right? So again, this is about being empathetic to the losses that people that are against your ideas might have. Listen to their reality, let them know you value them, and be authentic about your empathy for what they might lose. All right, managing the formal authority of figures is very important. And they can also be a good source of information, right? Like, you might not have quite as much of a high level balcony view about certain things, and they can help you with that balcony view sometimes. And then if there are people that say, but what about this? Or did you think about this? Or I think this might be a problem. Don't shut them down. This is part of that stance of inquiry, right? Be curious, say, oh, tell me more about this, right? Like, and consider, especially if you're somebody who has a formal level of authority in the organization, consider adopting some kind of anonymous way to seek input, because if you have a lot of formal authority, your employees might be shy about telling you their concerns at first. So consider including that anonymous way. All right, now the idea of experimentation. Leadership is improvisation, and any solution is a temporary resting place. I think that this idea that change is ongoing and never ends, I think is really important to realize that as a leader, you're never going to be able to say, okay, I've done it, and now I can just sit back and relax, right? And then if you try something and you call it an experiment, not only are you telling yourself, but you're telling other people that let's take some room to give this a try. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? And that gives you some flexibility, gives you an opportunity to take more risks, maybe carefully and thoughtfully exceed your formal authority. Maybe turn up the heat and generate a little bit more of that disequilibrium. Don't be afraid to point out where you have contributed to the mess that you currently are trying to fix. All right, so we're going to dive into the next adaptive challenge. Let me pull this over. All right, here we are. So now you're going to go back to the dilemma that you've already talked about, and try to use this stance of inquiry. Who can you work with to better understand the dilemma, right? Who can provide that important input that you might need? And then think about what you can do to act politically. Things that you can do to expand your informal authority. And then you're going to use appreciative inquiry to try to build upon your idea for an initial experiment to try. And so here's in your packet, you'll see the reminder of the appreciative inquiry process. And you'll also see some place where you can jot down notes on allies, opponents, who the senior leaders are that are important to your idea, and who the dissenters might be. Opponents and dissenters are different. Opponents have a reason to challenge the proposal that you're making, whereas dissenters are just kind of maybe those folks that are often the devil's advocate, that are often like just questioning and pointing out potential issues. So they don't have as much of a stake in it as opponents do. All right, and so we're going to take about 20 minutes. So I'm gonna bring you, let's see, we're a little, no, about 10 minutes, sorry, about 10 minutes. So I'm gonna bring you back right at 1 o'clock. Oh no, we're okay, sorry, folks. I'm like just looking through here. We're right, we're going to go until, let's see, we're starting at 12:50. Oh my gosh, we're right on time. Excellent, okay. So you're going to do exercise 2 from now until about 20 after. So I'll bring you back right about 1:20, and then I'll give instructions to go into the final breakout sessions of the day. So right now until about 1:20, go ahead and start working on that exercise number 2. Welcome back, everyone. You have another minute if you need to get your final polished thoughts together on your case. And I want to show you the instructions for this final breakout session of the day. All right, so you're really going to dig into it this time, and probably some of you have been itching to get to the brainstorming part, and so that's what we're going to do now in breakout session number 2. 20 minutes per participant, and that means that the teams that have 3 people are going to take a full hour to do this breakout session. And then the teams that just have 2 people, that gives you a little extra time if you need to kind of flesh things out a little bit. We'll come back together at 20 after and spend just well, actually I'll make it like 25 after, spend just a few minutes kind of wrapping up the session, and then you'll be on your way by 2:30. Okay, so peer consultants, again, you're going to make sure that you understand by asking any needed follow-up questions, and then you're going to brainstorm and come up with ideas or experiments for the presenter. Presenters, spend the first 5 minutes sharing your reflections on the exercise you just did. Anything that you kind of gained from this acting politically exercise, and then share your ideas about a possible intervention. Next, peers, take a couple of minutes to make sure that you totally understand what's going on with the presenter's dilemma. And then peers are going to spend 8 minutes brainstorming. So you want to come up with potentially new initiatives, maybe some smart risks, maybe some experiments that the case presenter could try. Go ahead and just go for it, throw out ideas. Nothing is a bad idea at this point. Presenter, try not to speak at all during this 8 minutes. You are going to just listen and potentially take notes. And then at the end, you'll have 5 minutes to just kind of share your reflection on what you've heard. You're kind of maybe asking some questions to clarify some of the ideas. You're not buying into any specific idea or defending against any specific idea, but just like, what have you gained from the reflections that or from the brainstorming that your peers have done? And then I'll call you back and we will be ready to wrap up our session. So this is all on page 14 of your packet.
So Logan had to leave too. So just so you know, Angie, you are now with BRAD and Catherine.
Okay. You know what? I appreciate everybody who's stuck with it through the whole thing. I know that of anybody in the world, public health workers are like crazy right now. So good for you. And I hope that you gain a lot out of this last part of the session. So Emily, go ahead and start up those breakout rooms. I will be here.
How long do you want them in?
They're going to be in for just about 60 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because for the 3-person teams, they need 20 minutes per person.
Perfect.
Welcome back, everyone. Jen, you're laughing. Did I cut you guys off a little too fast? So sorry. All right. Well, you are the folks that made it to the very end. So that shows true dedication. And I really thank you for that. Does anybody want to just, share any insights with the whole group?
I'll go first. I'm not afraid. When we were going through these, when we're going through these activities, I'm like, wow, there's just a small didactic portion and then a huge, active learning process. And I was thinking, well, maybe it would be nice if we had more time to sink in with the didactic portion and have a case study that we did as a group. And then I started thinking my feedback for these things always is more time active learning and less time as a big group. And then especially with how many people started today, if this was everyone that started today, we totally could have had big group discussions with the benefit of having our presenter there to give feedback throughout the process. But as it started this morning, there were way too many people. People would get 2 minutes of mic time. And this gave me some really good opportunity to type up 2 pages of notes and really think about something going on with my work. So yeah, the only thing that I would give for feedback is maybe next time, if you could jump into each, while we're in breakout groups, if you could jump into each one for a couple of minutes. But sometimes when that happens, there's good conversation that happens and everyone's supposed to present on their own. And then the facilitator jumps in, the conversation stops, and then you're only there for a couple of minutes talking about one person's. So I don't know. I don't know, but I mean, overall, I think that I'm a happy customer.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And this is really good feedback. Normally I do this session and I planned it as a 6-hour session. So there was more lecture. And then when I had to figure out how to cut it down to 4 hours, I really went back and forth. I was like, I really think the peer consultations are so useful, but it is going to be on Zoom and it's going to be a little difficult. But then I really struggled with knowing how much should we still have the peer consultations? How much lecture should there be? So I really appreciate that thoughtful feedback. So thank you so much. And I'll definitely think about, maybe incorporating a case discussion might be useful. Yeah, so we have more time together all together, but yeah, I'm glad to hear though that the peer consultation discussion went well. And it's clear that you and Catherine spent a lot of time together and really went through the whole process. So I'm thankful for that.
And I'm sorry to keep talking, but Dr. Albert Borgman, one of my favorite philosophy professors at the University of Montana, once said to our class, you can take a hypothetical situation, i.e. a case study, and get a hypothetical answer, and that brings us no closer to reality. Maybe you don't want to do that. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So Jennifer, doing an exercise together. Nice. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So maybe I can think about incorporating something that is more of a group exercise. And then, the problem is with the peer consultations, if you want to do them well, they take a long time. And I'm sure that all of you kind of felt like, oh, that's going to be plenty of time. And then at the end, you're like, oh, crap, we don't have enough time left. Yeah. Yeah. So excellent. Well, really, really appreciate it. Amy shared the feedback link to the feedback survey. So please do fill that out. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and, you know, like I'll incorporate them the next time I get an opportunity to do this training workshop. And I'll quickly share my screen because I want to share a couple of final points with you. First is, these are the things that I hope that we were able to talk about today and give you a little bit more information about today, especially this last one, where you got to, you know, at least preliminarily apply some of these tactics to a real life challenge that you're currently facing. And I hope that this is true, because this is my main goal of the workshop, that you've walked out of here with some tools that you feel like you could apply to your jobs. All right, and so if you would like, later on, you can think about like what you've gained from the workshop. Like, what is it that led you here? Ashley shared a little bit about her just general interest in leadership and learning to be comfortable with uncertainty. What are the most important things you think you're going to take away? And how has the workshop maybe changed some of your thinking? And how can you apply some of the things that you've learned? Finally, here are just some additional resources, and not necessarily directly related to things that we've talked about today, but some of the things that I think might be helpful for folks that are working in a field like public health, where you're facing a lot of uncertainty pretty much all the time in our current COVID-laden world. So just wanted to say another sincere thank you to everyone. I appreciate that you stuck with it through the entire 4-hour workshop in the midst of your very busy, busy days. And feel free to contact me anytime if you have questions, or, you know, just want to float an idea or whatever.